Hello, welcome to the Sunday Politics in the West. Coming up...
If we added the two together, 81 plus 32...
Is the government getting its sums wrong when it comes to paying for our schools? Cash-strapped head teachers in Wiltshire think so. They're having to lay off staff as promises to reform school funding have been pushed back. Well, my studio guests this week are the Conservative MP for Chippenham, that's Michelle Donnellan, and Labour's MP in Bristol West, Thangam Debonair. Welcome to you both. Thangam, let's start with you, because you've got a new job this week. You're a whip for the Labour Party, just a week after saying that you wouldn't work with Mr Corbyn.
I don't think I put it quite that brutally. I mean, we're all working together. We're all part of the Labour Party. We are one Labour. We're all part of the same team. And I'm really happy to be in the Whip's office, where I'm being... communication between backbenchers and frontbenchers is so important.
The Whip is traditionally the enforcer for the leader. You're a Corbyn enforcer.
I'm an enabler.
So you're enabling him to do things?
I'm enabling the Parliamentary Labour Party to pull together as one team and take the fire to the Tories.
Right, but you will unite them and you'll say, look, Jeremy wants this, this is how you should vote.
That's not quite how it works. I mean, we have different shadow secretaries of state who've all setting policy directions for us. We work together as a team. We've got a national policy forum. It's not quite that Jeremy Corbyn sets every little line and detail. So we're one team. But of course, I'm working under Jeremy Corbyn. He won a massive mandate.
There's no shame in saying you're going back, but are you going
It's not
back?
really back so much. It's sort of sideways into the Whips. I mean, I'm very happy to be in the Whip's office, but it's not the same as being a shadow minister,
okay.
no. And I'm really pleased with where I am.
But you still want him out if you can?
I'm learning loads about Parliament, and I'm getting to know loads of my colleagues, and I'm really pleased about it.
Nicely sidestepped. Is Theresa May right to think that Brexit means she can do whatever she wants and she can bypass Parliament and not have a vote on Article 50?
Well, she's not doing that, for one thing. First of all,
she's having a vote, is she?
Well, the British public voted for Brexit, so we have a mandate to do that and a job to do that. And then we're doing the Great Repeal Bill, which will then put in place a repeal of all of those European legislations so that we can then together go through them in Parliament and get the best deal for Britain, the control again over our own legislation.
Before Article 50 is triggered in March, by the end of March, should MPs have a say on that?
Well, we will be doing with the Great Repeal Bill, which will be repealing all of those bills. We will be having a vote on the Great Repeal Bill, which will be bringing through all of those bills.
OK, but no vote. She can go to Brussels and she can say, Article 50, we're on our way towards the door, without getting formal parliamentary approval.
But if she did or didn't, it would be wrong, because we've had a referendum already saying that we're to do that, and we now have to respect the will of the people. I think it's really wrong that we could even be discussing this and saying that we should be potentially ignoring the will of the people. I voted to remain. I wanted to stay in Europe.
But we live in a parliamentary democracy.
But we also set a referendum where we said we were going to trust the British public, and trust them we should do.
OK, thank you. Theresa May's big speech last week was all about fairness and equality. So is it fair that students at some London schools get double the amount of funding compared with the students at schools here in the West? Local head teachers who face mounting debt say the government must act now. Here's Dan O'Brien.
The scenery here may be rich, but the local schools certainly aren't.
So this is an example of the parent donations.
But without the donations from parents, your funding at the moment means you wouldn't be able to pay for facilities like this?
No, we wouldn't be able to do that.
As well as running this Bradford-on-Avon school, Neil Baker also chairs the Committee of Wiltshire Head Teachers. He says something's got to give.
My current budget is 1.4 million. We're a Wiltshire school, so it means that we're the 7th worst funded authority in the whole of the country. If I were to be a school in Bristol, then my budget would be different to about £500,000. Schools are telling me, as chair of Schools Forum, they're looking at redundancies, they're looking at their own assets, they're looking at not being able to replace buildings.
If we added the two together...
School funding is a complex equation which the government had promised to rewrite. After an initial consultation, any change has been delayed for at least another year. Local MPs demand it bring a better deal for the West.
Schools in Somerset are hanging on for the introduction of that fairer funding model. So will the Secretary of State encourage the Chancellor to look favourably on the plight of rural schools?
But there's no extra money, so while some areas may gain, others will lose out. And as if the decision wasn't hard enough already, then the EU referendum happened.
The reason it's been delayed more recently is because we saw before the summer we had the EU referendum, we had a new Prime Minister, essentially a change of government, And I think it was quite understandable that they wanted to pause, reflect on what they have learnt from the first consultation and think about how they go forward.
Let's look at the current system. Originally designed to target deprivation, it generally benefits big inner cities at the cost of rural counties. See how Wiltshire, on average, gets a lot less per pupil than Bristol, but it's nothing compared to parts of London, which get double the amount. If the formula doesn't change soon, the forecast for local schools looks bleak.
We've had to cut back on our maintenance programme. We pride ourselves on our environment and what we're able to do for the students, but we've had to drastically reduce that. Class sizes in the sixth form are larger than they were 2 or 3 years ago. We haven't had to do a staffing restructure, and that would be the last thing that I would want to do, but a number of schools have already had to face that and have had to cut their teaching quota and their support staff quite drastically. I can't begin to contemplate what would actually happen if we got no movement at all. We just could not afford to operate.
The Department for Education told us it's still firmly committed to introducing a fairer funding formula and expects to publish its proposal sometime this autumn. There will be winners and losers of any new funding system, but right now the uncertainty is good for no one.
Well, Neil Baker is the head teacher of Christchurch Primary School in Bradford-on-Avon. You saw him in the film. He's also chairman of the Wiltshire Schools Forum, which represents all primary, secondary and special schools in the county. Thanks for coming along.
You're welcome.
You're not serious, are you, that you need as much money as the kids in Hackney?
I think it's a question of a parity of funding. Children themselves were being judged by the same outcome statements. So if we're being judged by the same outcome statements, then our input
how many
is not
children
the
have you got who don't have English as their first language, for example, in your school?
We don't. We have few. We have 8. I could name 8 children that we have in ours. Our issue isn't necessarily to do with that. If you were to take the funding and take the basic funding schedule, regardless of the dedicated school grants that comes into school, the bottom line is those schools in Hackney will not only receive double the amount of school funding that schools in Wiltshire will get, but they get additional money on top of that for English as additional language and for pupil premium and for special needs. So there is extra money on top. It's the base budget is less.
So how close to a crisis point are you now? Are schools outside the big cities now?
The difficulty with schools that they're having is able to be planned for the future. Schools in Wiltshire, their current debt stands at £3 million. In the future, the projected overspend of those schools is going to increase to at least £5 million.
Gosh, that's a lot of money. Well, Michelle, the local Wiltshire MP, is here. Can you explain to him why the government hasn't pressed on with the fairer funding that it promised?
Yeah, so first of all, this is something that I've been campaigning for long and hard, even before as an MP. I believe that the current system for funding schools is ludicrous because per head, children in my schools are getting less money, and that's just not fair. It doesn't mean that they get the fair shot in life that they deserve. So one of the things that we're doing as a government is we are introducing this fairer funding model.
Well, when?
Yes, it's hugely disappointing.
It was
it's
going
been
to be a
delayed by a
priority
year.
Because of Brexit?
No. So the consultation that we did created a huge level of response, more than ever anticipated, which has meant that it's been delayed. Yes, I'm disappointed it's delayed. I'm not justifying the delay, but I'm saying the important thing is we're getting it done. We're honouring that manifesto pledge, and it will be this Conservative government that makes funding in our schools fairer.
Thangham, you come from an inner-city constituency where your pupils will get more money than the pupils in Wiltshire. Do you think that's fair?
I think the whole funding formula has to be reviewed, and the Conservative Party committed to that. And Michelle said it's a delay, but I mean that's a delay in a child's life. So a delay of 1 year when you're 5 or 6, that's a whole year's learning which could be affected. And I don't really think that we should be seeing Brexit used as an excuse for dumping this and that, and particularly when it's a manifesto commitment, Michelle. And it's something I know you wanted.
Would you be prepared for money to be switched? Because the government said there's no extra money, haven't they? So it will move from the richer schools, or the schools, funnily enough, in poorer areas, to those in richer areas.
I would actually like to see the government take a different approach to funding education, full stop. It is the single most area of expenditure for our country's growth and economic prosperity.
So more, the bigger pot. What do you say about that?
Well, the important thing to remember is nobody in the Conservative Party has ever said that this delay is because of Brexit at all. Labour had a sufficient time to be able to change its education model and didn't do. This funding model is an arbitrary model that's developed year after year after year. The Conservative Party committed to altering this. It's something that's very complicated, can't be done overnight, because we've got to get it right. We've got to make sure that the schools in Bradford-on-Avon...
Am I right in saying the pot of money won't be any bigger?
We're working it out at the moment. That's potentially the model that will be used, so we'll be looking at...
What do you think about that?
Well, I think the issue is not necessarily the delay for the redistribution of funding. That's been delayed for 12 months, but my question would be why, when it comes to the delay, has there been an announcement that the actual £6 million savings that has to be made is now going to be made without there being a redistribution of funding. So schools in Wiltshire are not only now having to cope with a very small slice of the cake, but they're now having to actually cut that slice even more to pay for issues like the apprenticeship levy and the changes in pensions and work, but also the removal of the education support grant.
So that's going ahead, but the funding redistribution is being delayed.
It's being delayed.
Michelle.
I agree. I believe we should get the funding model sorted as soon as possible. It is very complicated to do. We do have to make sure that we're doing it right. Going back to your point a minute ago, some schools will be looking at lower budgets. That's the reality of this system. So that can't be done overnight. It needs to be rolled out. It needs to be done in the right way, and we need to listen to all them responses in the consultation.
But we could also listen to our head teachers, because I've spoken to heads in my constituency who have said the same problems as we've heard out loud here from Wiltshire. So the government knows that it's made changes to national insurance. The government knows that the apprenticeship levy has come in. So how come the government hasn't managed to add up and see that schools therefore need more money? Because otherwise a static budget is in real terms a cut, and that's exactly what we've got now, isn't it?
But
we've
the
got
current situation at the moment is that the schools in your constituency per head are getting more money. So you've got pupils that parents are paying tax are taxpayers. I've got parents that are paying tax.
Yes.
Yet they're not getting
and
as
we
big
both
a deal
agree.
for that return on
we both
investment.
agree we want a fairer funding formula, so why isn't it happening now? Why are we having to wait another
even if that
year?
meant less money for your people?
No, I don't want less money for my students.
I know, but given that the reality is they're not
don't.
going to increase the education budget.
I challenge that reality. I think the government introduced the apprenticeship levy, which I agree with. I think it's a good idea. But having introduced it, it should have made compensation for schools in the school's budget, and it hasn't, which in effect means a real terms cut. And that's a real terms cut which is going to affect the education of 5 and 6 and 7-year-olds for at least another year now before we get to the
You've got a
review.
difficult school year ahead
We've got
of
a difficult school year, and schools in Wiltshire are telling me they're going to have a difficult school year.
Redundancies, do you think?
Some schools are telling me they're looking for redundancies. Because in order to make amendments for the changes that are happening in April 17, they have to make their decision now in January.
OK, thank you for coming on. And give our regards to all your students in Bradford-on-Avon. I'm sure they've been watching and urging you on. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, who served you your coffee this morning? Who checked you in at the hotel? Chances are it might have been someone who's come here from the EU. So, after Brexit, where will we find those workers? Well, this week, the Gloucestershire MP, Mark Harper, made a suggestion. He used to be the Minister for Disabled People and believes much more could be done to help them into work. Here's Paul Baltrop.
In the kitchens at the University of the West of England is Olivia Watkins. She has Down syndrome. She likes her job, and her colleagues like her.
She's a valued team member and player with the rest of us in the kitchens. How are you finding it, Olivia?
I find it really, busy sometimes, but getting it all done makes me feel really happy.
Popping in to see how she's getting on, her father Ray.
Because I enjoy it in that kitchen, and they just keep me busy every day.
Getting the support and training needed to come this far isn't cheap. Their local council, South Gloucestershire, took much persuading.
Cost is always a big issue. It was a very, very big challenge for my wife and I, with lots of kickbacks, then start again, and then kick back again, start again. But we eventually did get a very good report together.
For 3 years, she was here. Fox's Academy in Minehead is the UK's only training hotel for young people with learning disabilities. They also learn to live independently. Around 90% subsequently get jobs. It isn't cheap. Fees are £45,000 a year. So to Westminster this week came the principal, seeking backing from the government.
It's increasingly difficult. We all know about austerity. We all know that local authorities are making huge cuts. Unfortunately, SEN, which is special education needs, tends to suffer more than other areas. So it's increasingly difficult to get funding into our academy.
This isn't just about improving the quality of life for people with learning disabilities. It can also make financial sense. A National Audit Office report estimated that the lifetime cost of supporting someone who's unemployed and in residential care is £4.7 million. If, on the other hand, they're trained and supported to live more independently, and go out to work, the cost drops by more than £1 million. And of course, they have more money coming in.
The issue of funding was discussed at Westminster as MPs debated how to get more disabled people into work.
Obviously that is expensive. Is it possible for the government to commit more funding to what is coming forward in the Green Paper?
Minister. Well, of course, resourcing will be part of the review, but let's not forget that getting people into work means people less reliant on benefits and more...
Bringing the debate, a former Minister for Disabled People. Mark Harper wants employers to do more, especially when the supply of workers from Europe reduces.
And I think we can use Brexit as an opportunity to challenge businesses to use some imagination and effort to look harder at employing people with a disability.
If employers can hire people who are job ready, who they can drop straight into the workplace, perhaps with not having to do much training, and they're like ready to go, naturally they will think of those rather perhaps than somebody where they might have to put in a bit more effort, a bit more training, and perhaps make some reasonable adjustments.
Back in Bristol, Olivia is at her other part-time job, working in the kitchens of a primary school.
My favourite one is be at the hatch and help them to serve the children because they really have good manners and they're always polite.
As well as working, Olivia lives and travels independently. The challenge now is to help many others to follow in her footsteps.
Paul Baltrop there. Well, Thangham, let's start with you. Is it reasonable what Mark Harper said, that Brexit and a shortage of labour might be an opportunity to help more disabled people back into work?
All of us want to help disabled people into work, but I think what Mark was missing there is something that the principal of Fox's Academy brought up, which is cuts to funding. Now, he didn't seem to be mentioning, I haven't heard the full transcript of the debate, but he didn't seem to be talking very much about increasing funding for training and opportunities. Disabled people, only 1 in 3 disabled people has the opportunity to get a qualification, and that's wrong. I want there to be more funding for academies like Fox's Academy so we can actually train young people. That's not part of his discussion. I think it's also that he's treating the economy like a zero-sum game, as though we just treat people like chattel as well, saying goodbye to EU workers, ignoring the contribution they've made to the economy, and we can just bus other people in. There's so much more to it than that.
Michelle?
I think Mark has merit in what he's saying. There is a massive opportunity here that can come about from Brexit, not just for disabled people, but for long-term unemployed. There's a whole group of people that could potentially go in for any jobs that are available. But getting disabled people back into work has been a key focus of ours. In the last 2 years, 365,000 more disabled people are in jobs. So this isn't just one thing that we need to look at. We need to be looking at the round and encouraging employers to hire disabled people.
Some disabled people, of course, really want to work badly, but some are frightened of being pushed into work, actually, because of the government's assessments of their medical conditions and so on.
This isn't about forcing anybody. This is about encouraging and enabling people to get a job. Most of the disabled people that I speak to that are able to get a job really want that job. They want that independence. They want that freedom. And that's why we should be focusing on giving them the choices and chances that an able-bodied person would get as well.
But we also need to focus, Michelle, I'm sure you agree, on reforming institutions like Concentrics, which the government has allowed to treat disabled people really quite badly in the welfare benefits system. And Concentrics is one of those agencies that the Department of Work and Pensions uses to carry out assessments of people with disabilities in the benefit system. Now, that's really putting disabled people under pressure and making life harder for them. And what we really need is a good look at the welfare support system and the training system.
So are you saying you're concerned that if we lose a stream of workers from the EU, that disabled people could be forced into work effectively against their will?
I'm worried about that, yes. And I'm worried about the constituents who come to me who say that they've been badly treated by the system so far. So I don't have confidence that there's going to be proper training and provision for people with disabilities.
I think it's really important to point out that Mark was not talking about people that are unable and unfit to work. He was talking about disabled people that are able to work, but potentially the jobs are not available at the moment, or the employers are not disabled-friendly enough. And I think everybody would agree that if Brexit can provide opportunities for them or for the long-term unemployed or anybody else that wants to work, that's a good thing.
But we need the funding, don't we, Michelle? We need the funding for employers to make...
But I guess, does this actually reinforce the people who voted Brexit because companies perhaps got lazy and just picked up people from, came in on low wages from the east of Europe and ignored disabled people who could squeeze them out of the market?
Yeah, but it's also, I think we need to think about disabled people as a wide spectrum. Actually, people with disabilities have loads of talents, and I think thinking that there's just going to be all these jobs in hotels and catering that disabled people can just slot into ignores the fact loads of disabled people have top jobs, and they're facing discrimination. They're facing discrimination and cuts to the Access to Work programme, which allowed employers to make adjustments. Now, there have been cuts to that programme programme. I didn't hear Mark talking about that.
Well, we've actually increased it by setting up the Work and Health Unit. We've been doing a lot of work to get employers to hire disabled people with disability-competent events up and down the country. So it's not true that we have been cutting it at all. Actually, we've been creating it as a focus, and that the figures speak for themselves. 365,000 more disabled people employed.